Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. Today, we're going to talk about crisis communication and the important role it plays in emergency management. Our guest is Shawna Bruce. Shawna teaches on the topic. She also has a background with the military and with private sector. So stay tuned as I talk to Shawna about the important role communications plays when it comes to disasters. Hi, Shawna. So welcome today, and it's great that you could be here.
Thank you, Leanne. I'm so excited to be part of your program.
Good. Well, so I mentioned earlier that your background is really, you've done a lot with the private sector, with, I know, the military background, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have been probably working in communications for, it feels like 100 years. It's probably more like 35, but it feels like a lot longer. Yeah. And I come from that background, not an emergency management background, but I did start in the military as a public affairs officer and then went on to do work in industry with an international petrochemical company. During that time, I wanted to learn how to better support emergency managers. So I went back to school to study disaster and emergency management. And that's sort of how I've come to be where I am today.
Yeah. Well, I know when I'm out teaching in communities, I always talk about the top challenges. Crisis communications is always right up there. And so, you know, that's why I wanted to talk to you today, to just give people an idea of what's involved in the crisis communications piece, especially when it comes to disasters.
Well, what's really interesting to me is that I am always the proponent that communication is a key element to your entire emergency management program. So the crisis piece or the response piece, absolutely integral, but you need to have that communications woven in for mitigation, your preparedness, and then onto your recovery after you have your response phase in there. So you're only going to see success in all the phases if you're communicating well within those phases. So that's a first key thing, is crisis is absolutely integral and important, but don't dismiss the other pillars.
Yeah. I know one thing too, when you watch during, and it's usually the response phase, you see people, and whether it's a mayor, it's a council member, whatever it is, you see people who are the official spokesperson for the community. And sometimes they shine in that role, and other times it's extremely awkward for them. Just around the spokesperson piece, like what's the kind of things you've seen or you'd recommend if communities are having to design a function, you know, to
manage that? Yeah. Preparedness. I mean, you cannot overemphasize preparedness when it comes to crisis communication. And that includes your spokespeople. Whoever your spokespersons are going to be, they need to have media training. They need to understand their role as a spokesperson so that they can start to disseminate that timely and accurate information. You want your municipality or community to be that sort of what we call that confident spokesperson or that center of information. You want to own that information, right? And they're representing your entire council or community in that crisis. And that's where you need to have someone who's prepared and comfortable in that role. And it comes with practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I know another thing is your audiences, understanding your audiences, because I when I'm talking to communities, and I've yet to see a really good example of this, so maybe you can help me, give me some other ones, but I see them communicate very well to residents. I rarely see them communicating to businesses. And so even understanding that, you know, as a communications spokesperson, can you acknowledge business as part of this overall response recovery thing?
Well, absolutely. Business continuity is key. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a major disaster or event in your community, you're only going to get people coming back and returning to that community in their lives if you have businesses and services that are there for them. Yeah. They say, I want to say it's 10 days that it takes a small business owner to get in that space where they could lose their business or recover from a disaster. I just driving here this morning on Jasper, I saw a restaurant closed due to flooding. And it made me think, gosh, I really hope they had a plan in business continuity and that they get up and running soon, because it doesn't take long for small business to kind kind of tap out on resources financially and not recover. And they have employees depending on them.
Exactly.
That also need a paycheck. But I think what's really important, and I'm going to push back to that P in preparedness and planning, because if you have your Chamber of Commerce president or your economic development people working with the emergency management team in advance to help them understand the importance and integral role of business, then you need to have one of those people absolutely in the response in your ops center supporting you on what needs to happen next. Don't forget business. Make sure you include businesses. And we've seen that with Fort McMurray. We've seen different outreach in the Alberta floods where they recognize the need to keep those businesses informed of progress. And we saw success out of some of those situations.
That's awesome. That's music to my ears because I've been harping on that bandwagon for a few years now, and I'm thrilled that, that message, I know in the US it's much more common, but I found in Canada, it was still kind of, businesses over there, like, it's not a focus, but I agree, if you don't take care of your business community, you may not have a community to come back to, or jobs to, when you want to return. I think one of the other things is this area, it must have been revolutionized with social media over the past few years. So how are you seeing that social media piece play into crisis communications today?
Well, social media has certainly been, it isn't new anymore, but if you start thinking back to the Asian tsunami in about 2004, we started to see personal photographs, digital video, that type of thing surfacing. And we started to get personal accounts kind of threaded into what the reality was on the ground and the information shared by those responding. Yeah. So we've now had it around for like 15 years. And I always say, social media is awesome. You need to have a presence. The public is expecting you to have this presence. And so your Facebook pages in your community, your organization, your Twitter feed, what have you. But it's not the only tool in the toolbox. It's another tool in that toolbox. And it's a great one to amplify your message. But more importantly, you need to understand who are my audiences and how are they getting their information. So, and you can't make assumptions. So you may think, well, you may have a grandmother that's using Facebook to chat with her grandchildren, but it's more likely her son is following a Twitter feed, and perhaps the grandchild is using Instagram. So how are audiences getting information? That's what you need to understand and insert yourself. And you need to use all of the tools in that toolbox to reach everyone.
And it's funny you say that because when I'm out in communities and I'm polling that question, there is a bit of an age difference because some people, not the really young ones, they're not on Facebook.
That's right.
They're on Twitter and they're on Snapchat and Instagram. And so just understanding, who is your authoritative voice? Like, who do you trust to get accurate information? And then, and understanding if that's where they're going, you better figure out how to get on that platform.
That's right. And you want to be that trusted source of information for them. So I'll always share with clients or with students, use your social media, but bring it back to your homepage or your internet homepage that you own, where you can own the message. So put it out on Twitter, but link it back to your homepage where you're the credible source of information. So use the social media to get it to a wider audience and then bring them into where you are posting your information so that there's no misinformation opportunities. There's no one that's challenging that information. You've got a press release posted. You've got photographs or maps posted. They know you're the trusted source.
Yeah. Because I know rumors fly.
Absolutely.
And getting on top of those before they get too far down the road is important too.
Well, and I think the other thing I would say that social media has done is it's a tool for the emergency manager now. That social listening that you're doing is giving you real-time information in many cases of what's happening on the ground, in the field, in places where you may not have response teams or you can't get into, right? And so think about the recent hurricanes that we had down in the Bahamas and things. How are we getting information back? You had very few people in there, and it was starting to be posted on social media pages, and people were making decisions on response based on real feed and time information they were receiving. So I think that's another element of social media that has been great for emergency management. But it also, when you hit it on the head there, You need to be listening. You can't just post stuff in social media and leave it.
Yeah.
You need to be watching it. You need to have people that are making sure, correcting misinformation, and responding. It's social, right? So you're having conversations with people. And I'll always remember, I talked with, a gal who was managing during Fort McMurray the Twitter feeds and the social media for Alberta government, Sherry Doyle. She's amazing. And she mentioned to me that they started to get questions about when tuition was going to be due from students. Like it's not something emergency managers were probably thinking of at the time, but a lot of students were saying, hey, like my summer job's impacted and now like when is my tuition due? So they had a few of them come in, questions about that. And they went to the Ministry of Education and said, what are we doing about this? And they got a postponement for the due date for tuition. So that's an element, that's an example of where we're monitoring your social media is actually answering real questions from your audience.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So the other thing is when you have, your plans are great when everything's working, but when your power is out, your internet's down, you don't have access to your social media accounts.
That's right.
Then what do you do?
Well, I think that you need to be planning for that. That has to be a scenario that you're planning for. What am I doing without any power? How am I communicating? Most of us have gone to remote phones or our cell phones. What if I don't have any ability to communicate? And interesting, even if you consider your now I'm losing the words out. The platform that you're using for your internet.
Yeah.
So say something happens there and you have no means to communicate even via email. So I know during the Olympics, we actually created for the military backup accounts on Gmail in case the DWAN system went down for the military and the key people had to talk.
Yeah.
We just had backup plans everywhere. With the power and those things being done in advance, you may have to be in a situation where you're going out to your audiences before things happen, if it's a major storm, and telling them how you're going to be communicating or where they can get information. Maybe now you're moving things to a local community center where you're holding town hall meetings.
Yeah.
So, and this has happened before where we've seen, communicators spend 2 days trying to pull together a website during a flood situation when really all we needed to do was put an 8.5 by 11 flyer together and walk it to the evacuation center, right? And give people the information and the phone numbers. Yeah. They have no way to charge up their phone, so they can't get on the internet. So we have to think through those kinds of pieces and figure out, are there tools out there that we can be using in the absence of power?
And that's great. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think you and I could probably talk for another hour.
We probably could.
And we may have to do this again at some point. But is there anything, just as we close, that maybe you wanted to mention and you didn't get a chance? Or
I would just say that as much as we've changed with the introduction of social media, things have changed the same. We have to respond faster. So that cyclone of news in 24 seconds is replaced by what used to be the 24-hour news cycle. Yeah. People are expecting stuff out there in 15 minutes. Have holding statements that you can put out there where you can take accountability and say, we're responding. We'll have more information. Watch this space for when it comes available. So regardless, you need to use the 3A approach. You need to acknowledge that you had an incident or a crisis, that something's happening, and take ownership of it. It's us. Something's happening here. You need to actually agree with and demonstrate some caring in your response and empathy, and you need to take action. You need to tell people what you're going to be doing for the response, and then you need to do it and show you've done it. So, acknowledge, do the empathy with your some kind of action of caring, and then show them and address that you're going to be taking some kind of response to it. Yeah. Don't let it fester.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because you've got to get ahead of it, because if you don't, it can actually make the disaster worse.
Absolutely. Timely and accurate communication saves lives.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's a great way to end that. That's awesome, Shawna. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
For being here today and sharing your expertise, your experience. And so that's it for this episode. And if you want more things, all things disaster, feel free to subscribe to our channel. And in the interim, stay safe.